My name is Ed Smith. I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a grandfather. I was born into a very loving family, experienced a wholesome family life growing up. I've been married for 48 years, and we had two children, our daughter Cheri and a son Steve. Since then, our son has gotten married, and we have two grandchildren, a 12-year-old and a 7-year-old. The boy is 12 and our little granddaughter is 7, and they're a delight. I love being part of a family. A family is a place where people are nurtured, are given an identity of being valuable and supported in every way possible. The most important thing is that they know they're loved, and that love needs to be unconditional. I know in our family, Cheri, up until the age of 15, was a young gal that really did flourish. She was at top of her class in school all the time. She was a peer counselor. She loved helping other kids in her class. She played sports. She played ringette in the winter, ball in the summer. She was musical. She played the piano and the flute, and was a delight to have in our home. But as I mentioned, at age 15, things changed, and we didn't know why. Cheri became much more combative in our home. Her language changed, the way she dressed changed, and we were concerned about her. The counselors that we went to said, she's going through adolescence, that's to be expected, just love her and you will get her through it. Well, Cheri went to the summer exhibition in Regina with her younger brother to have some fun, which was fine. But while she was there at the exhibition, she met a young man who was just a year older than her. Cheri was 17 at this time. This young guy was 18. I don't know what he said to her, but Cheri came home and told us that she had fallen in love with him and she was going to leave home to be with him. And we told her, Cheri, you've only known him for a few days. This is not a good idea. But she wouldn't listen. And sure enough, one day a car pulled up in front of our home, a young guy that we didn't know. Cheri was 17 years old. Legally, we could not force her to stay at home, and she left our home that day with that young man, left us behind in tears. We knew this was not a good idea. 2 weeks went by. We didn't know where Cheri was, and we were sick with worry. But then early on a Monday morning, about 5:30 in the morning, my phone rang, and I answered the phone to speak to a Calgary City police officer who said, Mr. Smith, I'm phoning to tell you that I have your daughter with me. He said, last night in downtown Calgary, I was driving on the juvenile stroll, and I saw a fresh new face, and I have taken her into protective custody, and I'm phoning to tell you that your daughter was working as a juvenile prostitute. And I said, no, sir, my daughter would not do that. He had to convince me that in fact it was Cheri that he had with him. But he said, I believe she is salvageable. And if I were you, I would come and get her. My wife and I flew immediately to Calgary that same day and went to the airport to meet the officer. And I remember going down the hallway where he told us to go, seeing him with Cheri. And I ran and I hugged her. And I said, Cheri, it's going to be okay. We're here to take you home. The past is the past. It's behind us. But when we got Cheri home, we discovered that she was a very different girl than the one that had left our home. She would burst into tears for no reason. She would become angry for no reason. She had changed so much. She wouldn't stay at home. She left again to be back to her boyfriend, as she called him, which was in fact her pimp. And all through that winter, Cheri was trafficked on the streets of Winnipeg, Edmonton, Calgary, and Cheri did something that most kids don't do that are on the street. She phoned home all the time, probably 3-4 times a week, always collect calls. Even though Cheri was making a lot of money on the street, she never had any money of her own. All the calls were collect, and the phone calls all started the same way. She always said, "Hi, Dad, it's Cheri, I love you." And it didn't make sense to me. We always said, "Cheri, we love you, and you can come home. We want you to come home. What's happening to you now is not love." But she wouldn't listen. She always said the same thing to us. She always said, "No, Mom and Dad, I can't come home because I love him. He needs me. I'll do whatever he asks." And so there was that control and manipulation that was there that prevented her from returning home. And it was hard for us to understand how she would stay there. We knew, and she admitted that she took beatings because some days she didn't make enough money. She also admitted that she hated what she was doing, was using drugs. She said, "If I use enough drugs, it numbs my mind and I don't have to think about it." But she wouldn't stop. Finally, a phone call one day was from Cheri again, and this time it wasn't collect, because she said, Hi, Dad, I'm home now." Well, she wasn't in our home, but what she meant, she was now working in Regina on the streets. Linda and I and Steve, our son, we would go and drive around and find her, take her out for coffee, tell her we loved her. Again, ask her to come home, but you know what she'd say. "No, I can't do that. I love him. He needs me. I'll do whatever he asks." That's always what she said. But she wasn't feeling well. And she said, "Mom, would you come with me to the doctor tomorrow?" And so the next day, my wife Linda and Cheri went to the doctor, and that's when we found out that Cheri was expecting. She was pregnant. She didn't know who the father of the child was. The doctor also discovered that Cheri had a sexually transmitted infection, and he told Cheri, "This is going to be very bad for you and the baby. You need to have an abortion and get treated for this infection." But she said, "No, I'm going to have this baby, and when I give my boyfriend a baby, he will love me for having a baby, and I won't have to do this anymore." I think Cheri knew that he did not really love her, that he was using her, but yet, because of the control and manipulation, she would not leave him. Cheri went right back out onto the streets, working now as a juvenile teenage prostitute. And finally, she was arrested by the Regina City Police. She was charged with soliciting. A court day was set, and I went to court that day. I wanted to plead with the judge to turn Cheri over into my custody so that legally I could make her stay at home. But Cheri wasn't in court that day, because you see, the pimps don't like it when their girls get busted, because sometimes they will turn evidence on the pimp and then he will end up in jail. So he moved Cheri and the other girls that he had working for him, and they went out to the West Coast. Began working the streets of Victoria, and Cheri still phoned home, but now there was a sadness in her voice that I think she knew that she needed to get away from this situation. But it was right about then that the phone call stopped. And we wondered what's going on. This is not like Cheri. She phones all the time. And so my wife Linda said, I have to go and look for her. Linda traveled out to the West Coast, went down onto the streets of Vancouver and Victoria. Linda talked to police officers, cab drivers. She talked to other girls that worked the streets. They didn't know where Cheri was. But Linda discovered a real sense of despair that was on the street. And Linda told me about, when she got home, she told me about a little 16-year-old girl that she met who was working the streets of Victoria. This 16-year-old girl had a 6-month-old baby with her. And Linda talked about holding that little baby, and the little 16-year-old girl saying to Linda, my mom wouldn't come looking for me. She was in a state of despair. She did not feel she was loved. She felt she had nowhere to turn. And for me, Hope Restored Canada is a place where these girls with no hope will be able to turn. And that gives me so much hope and it encourages me so much. Linda, of course, did not find Cheri in Victoria. She had to come home without her, but we held on to hope because we knew that Cheri's baby would be born right around the first part of September. And so we waited. And sure enough, on September the 11th, 1990, a Regina City police officer came to our door, and I answered the door, and he said, Mr. Smith, I have news about Cheri. He said 2 days ago, a man riding horseback outside of Victoria came across the remains of a female body. And using dental records that we provided, they determined that it was the body of our daughter, Cheri. And so what were we going to do? That seemed like the end. But the story hit the news, it was in the media, and our phones started to ring. It was parents from right across Canada phoning in fear that their kid, who was also on the street, would end up just like Cheri did, asking us for help. What can they do? Well, we really didn't have answers, but we thought we need to do something. And we have a strong faith, and we felt that God was telling us that Cheri's death was not something that could just happen in vain. We needed to make something good come from this terrible, tragic situation. And so we started getting requests from schools to speak to children, usually grades 6, 7, and 8, about the risks of the street, the risk of the predator who's out there trying to recruit them to earn money for him. I got a call to ask if I would speak to men who have been charged with soliciting and have gone to the John schools. And so I've been doing that. And so since that time, 27 years have passed, and Linda and I have been involved in trying to help educate and trying to help people get off the street and back into a loving, normal relationship. And then it's something we've always prayed about, that there would be organizations like Hope Restored Canada established to do that very thing, bring about that hope and that restoration that needs to take place, the renewal that needs to take place in those lives of the people that have been so used and abused in the lifestyle of the street. And so we just felt so blessed to hear that Hope Restored Canada was starting up. We were privileged to be able to become members, and we want to do everything we can to support Hope Restored Canada in their mission of bringing renewal and restoration to those that have been abused, and also to educate, because we need to educate men about the harm they do when they pay money for sex, the lives that are being destroyed. We need to educate young people about the lies of the pimps who are looking for vulnerable young people to put on the street. And so through the work of Hope Restored Canada, we really believe that there will be lives rescued and saved because of that. And there will be young people that won't end up like Cheri did, that will live wholesome, healthy lives and not lose their life to the street. And so my hope has been restored by Hope Restored Canada.